The second you get that spark of inspiration for a new musical idea, you may start to hear certain instruments in your head that convey the musical message you're going for. From simple arrangements such as violin and piano to full-blown symphony orchestras comprised of hundreds of musicians, there are a million ways we can arrange instruments so that our piece sounds its very best. The traditional route of adding instruments has always involved live musicians and performers hired to make your music sound great and bring it to life. However, the recent advent of technology has allowed virtual instruments to become more accessible with every passing day, and nowadays we're literally spoiled for choice when it comes to sample libraries and gear. So the question naturally begs itself, which is better between samples and live players, and which should I go with? At some point or another, we all have to ask ourselves this question because we all need instruments to realize our musical ideas. So in today's video, we're going to compare and contrast some of the key differences between sample libraries and real players, and I'll share my personal recommendations for which I think is a better option depending on where you are in your journey. That being said, I think most working composers will use sample libraries at some point or another for demos or even full mockups. So if you're interested in my personal recommendations for sample libraries, I'd love to share my sample library buyer's guide with you. It's a comprehensive look into my favorite libraries that I use on a regular basis, and it's categorized into the different orchestral sections, including a few others for more variety. It's 100% free, so you can download it right away using the first link in the description box as my gift to you. I hope you'll find it valuable, and I'll continue to update it as I come across new libraries that not only resonate with me, but that I think will make a positive difference to your music and workflow as well. With that being said, let's dive in. We're going to cover 3 specific areas when it comes to considering live versus samples. The first one, which does receive quite a lot of scrutiny in sample land, is realism. In other words, how closely do samples and sample performances represent the sound of a live orchestra? Well, if we consider the methods of sampling and how libraries are put together, a traditional multi-sampled library requires the recording and capturing of specific instruments, editing those samples, then packaging them up for distribution to the composer, who can then perform these recorded samples on their MIDI controller of choice. So far, so good. We're essentially just using recorded performances in our own productions, so what's wrong with that? Well, nothing, right? But we have to consider a variety of other factors. What instruments are being recorded? How many musicians are being recorded? What sort of location is being used for the recording? What's the microphone setup and how many dynamics are being captured? All of these factors and more must be considered when working with sample libraries because at the end of the day, we're trying to create the illusion of a real orchestra performing together in tandem. On the other hand, when you witness a live orchestra performance, everything just falls into place immediately because all of the musicians are in the same space, they're most likely being recorded with multiple microphones capturing everything at the same time, they're being conducted together so they put forth the same emotion, and the list goes on. This is why samples can receive so much flack, because any hint of unrealism begins to tread in the uncanny valley, and can distract the listener from the music itself. Now the great thing is, most of us using sample libraries aren't necessarily aiming for the most realistic result possible, but rather a more or less accurate representation of the orchestra that helps us deliver our message across in an authentic way. But at the end of the day, samples can't hold a candle to the live orchestra in terms of realism, for the reasons previously explained. So this round goes soundly to the live orchestra. Next, let's go over control and flexibility. By this, we're talking about the amount of trial and error the composer can go through to get the result he or she is looking for. First, let's talk about the live orchestra. When you hire real players or even asking your musician friends to perform their instruments, they're going to expect a certain degree of preparation from your end. You'll need to have the music prepared, a certain direction you're aiming for, and be able to guide those musicians along the way to bring out the best in your arrangement. The thing is, if you're making certain decisions on the fly and need to make changes, you may be wasting time and money that could be better spent on other tasks. Sure, you could be asking certain players or sections to play louder or softer, or ask them to try different articulations and even swap out certain instruments for others, but is that really practical over a long period of time in a recording or rehearsal session? I would venture to say no, because the musicians simply want to play and make music, and if they're constantly being asked to try new things or tweak their performances during the session, then they may lose inspiration and potentially deliver a subpar result. On the other hand, sample libraries contain pre-recorded performances, which are essentially snapshots of live playing at your fingertips. The main benefit of this is that you can sketch melodies, chord progressions, arrangements, and really anything in between, all using a single polyphonic patch, meaning you can play multiple notes at the same time. If we're talking about melody, having a legato string patch enables you to hear what a melody would sound like in the violins without having to hire a violin ensemble to simply perform that melodic idea for you. Because there are multi-sampled recordings assigned to individual notes, you can get a great sense of how certain motifs, harmonies, and articulations would sound in the instrument of your choice, without having to worry about additional cost or time wasted. It truly gives you the flexibility and control to do anything you want, although you are sacrificing a degree of realism in the process. So if you're just starting out and you have some ideas and simply want to try them out, then samples will be your best friend because it's like you have an instrument at your command waiting to do whatever you wish. They don't sleep, they don't complain, they don't have feelings, anything like that. They allow us to bring our music to life, and assuming we have a good arrangement and an understanding of how the orchestra works as a whole, you can get pretty darn close to the real thing. So in terms of control and flexibility, I'd have to give this one to sample libraries. Finally, let's talk about affordability or cost. It's common knowledge that hiring live players is generally quite expensive, and for good reason. These musicians are typically at the top of their craft, and you're not only buying their time, but their experience, knowledge, and interpretation as well. Multiply this by a whole orchestra, and you could easily be spending at least $10,000 for the day. Don't forget the rental fee for the concert hall or the scoring stage, the engineers to make the final product sound as good as possible, general staffing, and much more. However, for those who can afford an orchestra or is fortunate enough to have someone else subsidizing the cost, going with a live option is a no-brainer to truly bring your music to life. On the other hand, technology and healthy competition are making the world of music production and sample libraries ever more affordable. Options can range from free libraries to a few grand per section, which in the grand scheme of things could be worth it because you're owning the libraries for life, and you can use those samples anytime. Another option is the subscription route, where you can pay a certain fee every month to have access to the company's sample ecosystem. Both models can appeal to different demographics, but are ultimately both safer and more affordable options for many composers on a budget and want to work from their home studios. Over the course of my career so far, I've spent just about 50 grand on all of my equipment, including my studio setup, computer, headphones, hard drives, and of course, sample libraries. Naturally, samples comprise the bulk of this cost, because with spacious hard drives becoming more accessible nowadays, you can download virtually unlimited amounts of libraries without physically seeing them piling up in front of you. While I do have some buyer's remorse, I feel reassured knowing that everything I've purchased is mine to keep, and the sheer variety of these libraries allows me to experiment with different musical styles or combinations whenever I'd like. Whereas if I spent that money on an orchestra, it's true that I would have an absolutely memorable recording that can't be replicated with samples, but at the same time, it's not like I'm purchasing every single musician in every concert hall, and I wouldn't have the ability to ask them to do whatever I wish, whenever I wish, right? So sample libraries can afford us some top quality sounds at relatively affordable budgets, which is why samples make the most sense for producers and composers just starting out. So all in all, I'd have to give the affordability aspect to sample libraries, although you can definitely hire some live players on a budget as well. At the end of the day, it really depends on where your priorities lie for your music. If you care about having the utmost realism and expression in your tracks, then hiring a live orchestra may be the perfect fit for you. Again, for many people, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience to have your music recorded by real players, and simply being in that sort of environment and hearing your ideas come to life can be the most exhilarating feeling ever, and is totally worth the budget. However, if you prefer to take the time to learn your libraries, try to get the very best out of them, and focus on using them to deliver the message of your music across, then sample libraries might be the better option. For me, having a piece recorded by a live orchestra would absolutely be a dream, but with the sheer quality of samples nowadays, I prefer to really sit down and craft each line to my liking, taking advantage of the freedom and the flexibility I have with each library to really realize what I'm hearing in my head. But I'm curious to know your thoughts as well. Do you prefer a real orchestra, or have the budget to have your music performed by a real orchestra? Or are you completely comfortable using sample libraries to realize your musical ideas, and you don't really care about having the utmost realism? Or maybe you lie somewhere in between. Let me know in the comments below. And again, if you are interested in my favorite sample libraries and how I use them for orchestral mockups, I want to give you my free sample library buyer's guide. It's categorized by the 4 orchestral sections, but I've also thrown in a few other categories that you might find useful. I've also included the prices and how I would use each library, so you'll get a crystal clear look into how I view libraries as a whole. It's totally free, so you can grab it using the first link in the description as my gift to you for watching through this video today. I appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.